Get out of the car now. Maya Carter was slammed face first onto the hood of the car, handcuffs biting into her wrists. Her throat felt dry, yet her eyes remained cold, sharp. The two officers in front of her had no idea that in just a few hours, their entire lives would crumble. Jonathan Reeves, tall and imposing, his eyes gleaming with amusement as he saw a black woman subdued. Eric Dalton, aggressive, lightly tapping his gun on his hip, a silent threat in the air. You just made a huge mistake, you know that? Reeves sneered. No, Maya responded, her voice icy. You two are the ones who made the mistake. Dalton laughed, but less than 24 hours later, he would be trembling in court, begging for mercy. But what really happened? Who is Maya Carter? And why are these two officers about to pay such a steep price? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications now to uncover the shocking truth behind it all. The cuffs bit into Maya's wrists, cold as steel, their grip tightening as if the night itself were trying to smother her. She was shoved forward with force, her back slamming against the edge of the patrol car door. But there was no flinch, no cry of pain, not even a flicker of anger in her eyes. Maya didn't struggle, didn't fight back. She simply watched, her gaze unwavering, as the two officers before her reveled in their moment of victory. That simple act of silence seemed to fuel their smug satisfaction even more. In their eyes, this was as easy as it got. A black woman, alone in the dead of night, caught with a bag of white powder they'd conveniently found in her trunk. What could be more perfect? Another notch on their belt, another criminal taken off the streets. This was exactly how they imagined their world, neatly packaged, no complications, just power. Jonathan Reeves slammed the patrol car door with such force that it rattled the vehicle. He turned to Eric Dalton, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. Too easy, right? He sneered, almost taunting her, as though he were the one in control. Dalton, ever the muscle, gave a slight nod. His eyes gleamed with disdain as he shot Maya a look through the rearview mirror. He smirked, casually tapping his gun on his hip as if it were an automatic reflex, a gesture to remind everyone of his authority, the kind of unspoken dominance that came from years of wielding it over those deemed beneath him. They're all like this, he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. All tough at first, thinking they're above it all. But the second they step into the interrogation room, they break, just like the rest of them. Maya didn't react. She had been here before, seen this act played out more times than she cared to count. Their words, their smugness, none of it reached her. She was too calm, too focused, too observant. The satisfaction on their faces wasn't a sign of success. It was a sign of certainty. They hadn't stopped her by accident, nor had they stumbled upon the white powder in her trunk through sheer luck. This wasn't a random stop. This wasn't a case of bad timing. They had been waiting for this moment, planning it, targeting her. She didn't know how long they'd been tracking her, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was finding out why. A familiar feeling settled in her chest. Not fear, but something far more potent, awareness. This was a game she'd played before, a game she had come to understand all too well. They thought they were in control. They thought they had her cornered. But Maya knew better. As the patrol car rolled through the streets, the flashing lights painting the empty roads in staccato patterns, Maya remained calm, her eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced ease. She could hear the faint hum of the radio, the disjointed calls coming through from the command center, a couple of routine updates, a few meaningless exchanges. But the route they were taking wasn't the fastest way to the station. They weren't heading to a destination, they were stalling. Why? Maya wasn't sure, but she could guess. Maybe they were enjoying the power trip of holding a criminal in their grasp, or maybe they were discussing something they didn't want her to hear. Either way, Maya didn't care. She had learned long ago that distractions were the enemy of the prepared. Instead, her attention was focused on the small watch on her left wrist, partially hidden beneath the cuff of her shirt. A few moments ago, when Reeves had grabbed her arm, she had discreetly pressed a button on the inside of her sleeve, a small, subtle gesture, but one that had already sent out a signal that would lead to her salvation, though the officers had no idea. Reeves glanced at Maya through the rearview mirror, his eyes sharp, predatory, as if trying to read her thoughts. He smirked. "You're pretty calm for someone in your position," he said, his tone dripping with mock admiration. "Not like the others. They usually crack right away." Dalton, who had been silent up until then, let out a laugh, a low, guttural sound. He turned in his seat to face her, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Maybe she knows she's already done for, he mused, his voice casual, as though her fate were already sealed. No point in fighting it. She knows she's going down. He chuckled darkly, shaking his head before turning back to the wheel and continuing to drive. Maya didn't respond. She had heard it all before. The cocky remarks, the assumption that they held all the cards. Officers like Reeves and Dalton were a dime a dozen. They thought they controlled everything. The law, the people they arrested, even the very streets they patrolled. But Maya wasn't just anyone, and she knew this game better than they did. She'd seen their kind before, arrogant, entitled, convinced that the system would always bend to their will. But Maya understood something they didn't. No one was invincible. No one was beyond reach. And right now, she was the one pulling the strings. She wasn't the one trapped in this car. They were. She stared out the window, her expression serene, her thoughts laser-focused. Behind her, the two officers still hadn't realized that the very game they believed they were controlling was slipping from their hands, piece by piece. They were blind to what was coming, but Maya wasn't. And when the time came, they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The streetlights flickered past Maya's face in a rhythmic blur as the patrol car turned down a quiet road. The stillness of the night contrasted sharply with the tension that hung heavy inside the vehicle. Maya's eyes drifted over the road signs, the sharp curves, the hidden alleys that led to neighborhoods long abandoned by the pulse of the city. Each detail was etched into her memory, not because she was scared, but because this was second nature to her. She had been here before, caught, cornered, falsely accused, her life tossed aside as if it meant nothing. But this time, it was different. She wasn't alone. Deep within the lining of her jacket, a tiny device had just sent out a signal, silent, hidden, and calculated. The moment it reached its destination, everything would change. Maya didn't need to act in haste, nor did she need to speak. She simply had to wait. The air inside the car felt suffocating, as though some invisible force was pressing down on each breath they took. The engine hummed steadily, the monotonous sound blending with the disjointed crackle of the police radio. But Maya could feel the growing tension within herself. She knew what was coming. Dalton's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his gaze locking onto Maya's face. There was no anger there, no fear, no frantic attempt to justify herself or plead her case. She was eerily calm, too calm. His brow furrowed as he stared at her, confusion and suspicion starting to settle in. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, almost involuntarily. "She's too calm," he muttered under his breath, a soft growl of unease slipping from his throat. "Something's not right. She doesn't even look scared." Reeves, who had been leaning back with a smug, self-assured grin, straightened up in his seat, glancing at Dalton with a sense of dismissal. "I've dealt with hundreds of people like her," he sneered. "They all think they're special. They think they can somehow outsmart the system. But trust me, they're all the same." His tone was sharp, almost patronizing, as if he needed to convince himself more than Dalton. "She'll crack the moment we get to the station, just like the rest of them." But Maya wasn't like the others. She wasn't the same as the ones who had cowered in fear, their voices trembling, their stories unraveling in the face of their supposed guilt. No, Maya was different. She wasn't prey. She wasn't a victim. She was the one who had been watching. She was the one in control, and they didn't even realize it. Her eyes remained fixed on the road outside, her expression unreadable, but inside, her mind was working, calculating, planning. She tilted her head slightly, allowing her gaze to flicker to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Reeves's reflection. His arrogance was palpable, the self-satisfied glint in his eyes as he thought he had her cornered. Every move he made, every sneer, every false sense of superiority, Maya had been watching it all, and she knew. She knew exactly what he was, who he was. He had done this countless times before, driven by a sense of invincibility, thinking he could control the game with a wave of his hand. But tonight, he had made the greatest mistake of his career. In that fleeting moment, the truth hit her like a jolt of electricity. They had underestimated her. They thought she was just another face in the crowd, just another woman they could manipulate, silence, break down. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Her pulse quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. As the patrol car sped through the empty streets, winding further into the city's shadowy corners, Maya felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The officers were oblivious, their laughter and offhand remarks bouncing off the interior of the car. But Maya knew something something they didn't. She had already won. Out there, in the quiet darkness of the city, a team was waiting. They had seen the signal. They had been watching. They knew exactly where Maya was, and they were coming for her. The game was over. Reeves and Dalton had no idea they were playing in the dark, blind to the fact that their entire world was about to collapse around them. Maya didn't need to say a word. She didn't need to fight back. All she had to do was wait. And when the time came, she would make sure they would regret ever thinking they could break her. Maya's breath slowed. Her mind focused on the path ahead. The city outside remained quiet, but in the shadows, things were shifting. A few moments, that's all it would take. They would soon realize that they weren't the hunters anymore. They were the hunted. The atmosphere in the police station was buzzing like a party in full swing after a big win. Officers gathered around Reeves and Dalton, congratulating them, slapping them on the back, and laughing loudly as they proudly displayed the small plastic bag of white powder like it was a trophy. Another clean bust. One officer snorted, tossing a glance toward the holding cell where Maya was locked up. They always think they can get away with it. Reeves shook his head, his grin wide, as he tossed the bag onto the desk with a flourish, clearly pleased with the arrest. She didn't say a word, just stared at me like she had some kind of plan, he said, his voice dripping with amusement, his eyes gleaming as if to savor the victory. He leaned back, enjoying the moment of triumph. Dalton opened a soda and leaned against the desk, his eyes on Maya's empty cell. A plan? He chuckled. Please, Reeves. I bet she'll crack after a couple of hours. Look at her, trying to act all tough. But in the end, she's just like the rest of them, a scared little criminal. Across the room, Ryan Mitchell, a younger officer, stood in silence. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh, didn't join in on the mockery. He didn't revel in the supposed victory. Instead, he stood off to the side, quietly observing. Something felt off. Maya's unshaken calm wasn't the kind of reaction he was used to seeing in criminals. He had seen many, too many to count, but this wasn't the same. Her composure wasn't fear, nor defiance. It was control. She wasn't reacting because she was terrified. She was waiting. And that, more than anything, set her apart. People who were truly afraid always reacted the same way. They trembled, begged, shouted, or crumpled into themselves. It was a knee-jerk reaction. But Maya? Nothing. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She didn't even show fear. She just waited. The stillness in her demeanor told Ryan everything he needed to know. She wasn't like the others. Maya was pushed into the holding cell with little more than a shove, her body sliding against the cold metal of the bars. The door slammed shut behind her with a heavy, almost final sound, reverberating through the room like a prison sentence sealed. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't even glance back at the bars that were now keeping her trapped. Instead, her gaze remained locked on Reeves, those deep, dark eyes piercing him like she could see straight through him. It wasn't the look of someone who had been beaten or broken. It was the look of someone who was weighing her options, planning, calculating, waiting. "Good night, gentlemen," she said, her voice soft, almost gentle, but with an underlying weight that carried far more than just words. It wasn't just a farewell. It wasn't just a casual remark. There was something to it, something in the way she said it that made the air around them feel thick, heavy. Reeves froze. The smug grin that had been plastered across his face faltered, then vanished altogether. His eyes narrowed as his mind briefly lost track of everything around him, as though her calm had seeped into his own thoughts, disorienting him. For the briefest moment, an unsettling feeling wormed its way into his chest. He couldn't place it, a sense of unease, a strange prickling sensation that he couldn't shake. It was just one simple sentence, just a few words, but it had left an impression. It echoed in his mind, reverberating like the sound of a door slamming shut long after it was over. Dalton, noticing that Reeves had stopped moving for too long, nudged him sharply. "Hey Reeves, what's up? You worried about her or something?" he asked, his tone mocking. It was meant to pull Reeves back into the moment, to remind him of the power they held. Dalton didn't see the same thing. To him, Maya was just another criminal, just another person who would break when the pressure mounted. Reeves snapped out of his daze quickly, shaking his head, trying to clear the odd sensation that had gripped him. "Nothing," he muttered, but the words felt hollow, empty. Deep down, though, a spark of doubt had been ignited. It was a feeling he couldn't ignore. He had arrested countless people in his time, had seen all kinds of reactions, but never once had he felt this This kind of hesitation, this feeling that something wasn't quite right. He glanced over at the cell, watching Maya's silhouette against the harsh fluorescent lighting. It didn't make sense. Why wasn't she breaking? The other suspects, the ones who'd been caught red-handed, always crumbled under the pressure. But not Maya. Her calmness wasn't the mark of submission. It was the mark of someone who was in control. And that thought gnawed at him, tugging at something deep inside him. What if she wasn't just another arrest? What if she wasn't just a criminal? Dalton laughed off his hesitation. "You're losing it, man," he said, clapping Reeves on the back. "She's a small-time player. She'll break soon enough, trust me." But Reeves wasn't listening. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd underestimated her, that something about Maya was different. As he walked away, he tried to dismiss the thought, telling himself that he had everything under control. But deep in his gut, he knew this was just the beginning. And no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the feeling that something bigger was coming refused to let him go. Ryan Mitchell sat in front of his computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as he opened the latest arrest report. The name Maya Carter appeared on the screen, her charge listed as possession of narcotics with intent to distribute. A sinking feeling crept into his stomach as he read. Something wasn't right. The details, at first glance, seemed straightforward. According to the report from Reeves and Dalton, Maya had agreed to a vehicle search, and they had happened to find a bag of white powder in the trunk. But Ryan had been doing this job long enough to know that criminals didn't just leave their most important evidence lying around in their trunks, especially not in such a convenient manner. It was too perfect, too clean, too easy. It didn't add up. His gut twisted as he clicked on the case files for Reeves and Dalton, expanding the list of arrests they had handled. As the list scrolled down the screen, a familiar pattern emerged, one Ryan had seen before but had never fully connected until now. They always arrested people of color, primarily women or young men, and charged them with drug offenses. But in nearly every case, there was no history of criminal activity. These weren't hardened criminals. They weren't the usual suspects. So why were they being arrested for drug possession with such consistency? Ryan's hand hovered over the mouse, his pulse quickening. Something about this wasn't random. He had worked with these officers for long enough to recognize when something felt off, but this felt wrong on a deeper level. He quickly scrolled faster, his eyes scanning case after case. The names were different, the dates varied, but the script, the scenario, they were identical. The same charges, the same kinds of arrests, women, minorities, drug busts, no prior convictions. The evidence was always discovered conveniently. Ryan's heart began to race as he realized what he was seeing. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a pattern. This was systematic, a carefully orchestrated abuse of power, and it had been going on for too long. Ryan stopped scrolling, his eyes locked onto the screen. The realization hit him like a slap to the face. What was supposed to be justice, what was supposed to be about protecting and serving, was nothing more than a twisted game, a game where innocent people were paying the price. The truth was right there, laid bare in front of him. This wasn't justice. It was corruption. It was exploitation. And it had been happening right under his nose. His thoughts were interrupted by a glance toward the holding cell. Maya was sitting there, completely still, calm and composed, as if nothing at all had happened. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for her innocence. She didn't scream, didn't try to run away. She just sat there, hands neatly placed in her lap, her back resting against the cold stone wall. Ryan's eyes narrowed as he studied her posture. He'd been a cop long enough to know that most people, innocent or guilty, didn't act like that. The innocent usually trembled, begged, pleaded for help. The guilty often grew defensive, trying to justify their actions or demand a lawyer. But Maya, she did none of those things. She was different. She wasn't reacting. She wasn't scared. Maya simply sat there, waiting. Ryan's breath hitched. He felt a strange weight settle in his chest, a discomfort he couldn't ignore. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. He had joined the police force because he believed in justice. He believed in protecting the innocent, righting wrongs, upholding the law. But what he was seeing before him wasn't justice. It was a corrupt system at work, and he was a part of it. He had taken an oath. He had sworn to uphold the law, to protect the public. But how could he do that when the very system he worked for was so fundamentally flawed? Ryan took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his mind. He wasn't naive enough to believe he could fix this overnight. He knew how powerful Reeves and Dalton were, how much influence they wielded within the department. If he spoke out now, If he dared question them, he would be putting himself at risk. His job, his safety, everything he had worked for. Reeves and Dalton weren't the kind of men who let anyone interfere with their methods. They had a system in place, a dangerous one. But if Ryan did nothing, what would happen to Maya? To the dozens of others whose names had come and gone in these files? What if Maya was just another victim of a system that was rigged from the start? His eyes darted back to the computer screen. He had to do something. There was no other option. He had seen too much to just walk away. The weight of what was at stake, what he might lose, pressed on him. But it was nothing compared to the guilt he would feel if he let this continue unchecked. Ryan clicked the mouse again, narrowing his focus on a specific file that had caught his attention. It was buried deep within the list of cases, another arrest handled by Reeves and Dalton. At first glance, it appeared to be just another case, but as he scanned through the details, he felt a flicker of recognition. The arrest report mirrored Maya's in many ways. Same charges, same story, same discovery of the evidence. He opened the case fully and examined it more closely. It was another woman, another black woman, an almost identical setup. And the report was remarkably similar in its wording, its timing, and the details of the search. It had all the hallmarks of the same pattern he had just uncovered. Ryan's heart beat faster as he clicked through more documents, digging deeper into the case files. There it was, a glaring connection, a chain of fabricated arrests built on lies and manipulation. He felt his chest tighten as he read. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't coincidence. This was systematic abuse. He had found the evidence he needed. He had the key to everything. But what now? What was he supposed to do with this information? His eyes flicked back to Maya's cell. She was still sitting there, her posture unchanged. She didn't look at him, but somehow, he knew she was aware of everything happening around her. She wasn't a victim, not yet. And Ryan knew that it was up to him to make sure she didn't become one. He stood up from his desk, his decision made. Whatever the consequences, whatever danger lay ahead, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. He had to stop this. In a building with no sign, located just a few blocks away from the police station, the surveillance screens illuminated the darkroom. The FBI task force had been tracking Maya Carter long before her arrest. On the screen, footage from a traffic camera played back, showing every detail, starting from the moment Maya's car was stopped to the moment Reeves and Dalton discovered the bag of white powder in her trunk. Everything was too perfect, too smooth. Exactly how those who abuse power set up situations to turn the innocent into criminals. No mistakes, no surprises, just a well-executed plan. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a dark suit, stood at the front of the room, holding a satellite phone to his ear. His voice was deep, filled with authority as it echoed through the silence of the room. The target has been identified. We move in as soon as we have enough evidence. His words were sharp, final, and carried a weight of determination. There was no room for doubt or delay. His team had been tracking Reeves and Dalton for months, waiting for a moment like this, a moment where they could gather enough to take them down. But now, the opportunity had come. This was their chance. The agents in the room stood motionless, their focus fixed on the screens as the plan began to take shape. No one spoke, but their silence was an agreement. This was it. They had waited long enough, and now all the pieces were falling into place. In another corner of the room, a younger agent leaned forward, rewinding the footage. His eyes narrowed as he watched Maya's demeanor during the arrest. The usual fear and panic that he had come to expect from those caught in this type of situation was absent. She's not scared, he murmured to himself, his brow furrowing. She's too calm. He glanced over at his colleague. She's acting like she knows exactly what's going on. The older agent beside him nodded slowly, his face serious. She knows we're watching. She's not just a pawn in this game. There was a note of respect in his voice, something rare when speaking about suspects. Maya wasn't reacting like a typical victim. Most people, when caught, would panic, plead, or try to justify themselves. But Maya, she was different. She was playing a much larger game. Back in the police station's holding cell, Maya sat with her back pressed against the cold concrete wall, her arms crossed over her chest, her face calm and composed. The silence around her was strangely thick, only interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway as officers walked past. But Maya paid no attention to them. She was in a world of her own. Her eyes flicked down to the watch on her left wrist, a small, inconspicuous thing hidden mostly by the sleeve of her shirt. She didn't need to look at it, but she did anyway. It was a reminder, a signal that everything was in motion. A faint, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she watched the seconds tick by. They had received the signal, and that meant only one thing. The countdown had begun. The clock was ticking for Reeves and Dalton. The moment they thought they had everything under control was the moment they had sealed their fate. Maya knew exactly how this would play out. She had been down this road before, and she knew how to stay calm when the walls were closing in. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't the one in danger. This time it was them. She sat there, poised and calm, her body unmoving but her mind racing. She could already feel the shift in the air, the agents watching, the surveillance teams monitoring the situation. They were already in position. They had been waiting for this moment, and now it was only a matter of time. Reeves and Dalton might have thought they had gotten away with their little game, but Maya knew better. She was always several steps ahead. Her gaze shifted slightly as she listened to the faint sounds outside her cell, her senses sharp, but her attention was always on the watch on her wrist. The time was almost here. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. She didn't need to do anything. She just needed to wait. Everything else was already being taken care of. Reeves and Dalton didn't know it yet, but their time was running out, and this was the beginning of the end. Ryan Mitchell took slow, deliberate steps down the cold, echoing hallway of the holding area, his mind heavy with hesitation. The noise from outside the holding area, the laughter of officers finishing their shifts, the rhythmic clatter of printers, and the casual chatter between them seemed a world away. But here, in this dimly lit hallway, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. The pale fluorescent light cast long shadows across the cold tiled floor, amplifying the quiet solitude of the space. Everything here felt muted, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in around him, pressing on his chest. He paused in front of Maya Carter's cell, his eyes scanning the thick iron bars before locking onto her. She was still sitting there, completely composed, her back against the stone wall, her arms crossed over her chest. The stillness in her posture was unnerving. There was no sign of panic, no desperate attempt to justify herself. Her expression was neutral, but there was an unsettling calmness about it, as if she had already accepted her fate or, perhaps, in some strange way, was in complete control of it. The quiet certainty in her demeanor was something Ryan had never encountered before in all his years as an officer. Taking a deep breath, Ryan steeled himself for what he had to do next. His hand hovered near the bars as he tried to summon the courage to speak, but there was something about this situation that felt different. His voice broke the silence. "Did you really consent to them searching your car?" His words weren't shouted, but they were firm, low enough to remain between just the two of them, yet clear enough that she couldn't miss the underlying question in his tone. He wasn't asking to accuse her, but to understand why she wasn't reacting like all the others. Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, her sharp eyes meeting his as she studied him. Her gaze pierced through him like a laser. It was as if she were weighing the very essence of him in that brief moment, considering whether he deserved an answer at all. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice smooth, calm, and measured. "What do you think?" The question, simple yet pointed, landed like a stone in the silence between them. Each word she spoke felt deliberate, almost as if she were speaking in riddles, carefully gauging his reaction before offering any more insight. There was no rush in her words, no urgency, only a slow, deliberate pause. And in that silence, she had already made him think more than he wanted to. Ryan felt a sudden, sharp shiver crawl down his spine, a wave of unease sweeping through him. It wasn't the typical response he was used to from suspects. Over the years, he had dealt with every kind of person. Those who were panicked, begging for mercy, trembling in fear or fury, or desperately trying to explain their innocence. But Maya wasn't like any of them. She didn't beg. She didn't cry out. She didn't lash out or scream injustice. Instead, she just sat there, as still as a stone, asking a simple question that caused his mind to reel. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath, but the feeling of discomfort only deepened. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he was aware of how calm, how composed she was. There was no hatred in her gaze, no desperation, no remorse, but something far more unsettling, certainty. She didn't seem worried about the arrest. She didn't seem worried about the evidence they had on her. She didn't seem concerned at all. Instead, It was as if she had already seen this moment unfold 100 times over, as if she were already playing out the next steps in her head. And that certainty, the calmness with which she sat there, almost like a queen on her throne, felt like a blow to Ryan's chest. It made him feel small. The thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. Who is she, really? He had seen plenty of suspects before, guilty and innocent alike, but Maya didn't fit any of the profiles he was used to. Was she guilty? The evidence seemed to suggest so, but her behavior, her presence, didn't match what he would expect from someone trying to hide a crime. She wasn't trying to fight the system, and she wasn't begging for her freedom. What was she playing at? Was she playing a part? Or was this all just one step of a much larger plan? He tried to push the questions away, but the more he thought about it, the more they gnawed at him. His hand rested on the cold iron of the cell bars, his knuckles white from gripping them too tightly. His mind was racing, spinning in circles, trying to find answers that were just out of reach. There was an uncomfortable pressure in his chest, a weight that was making it hard for him to think straight. Was she guilty, or was she something else entirely? And if she wasn't a criminal, then what was he really dealing with? Maya's gaze never wavered. She just sat there, her posture perfect, waiting, watching him, as though she knew he was at a crossroads. She knew something he didn't, and that realization sent a wave of dread crashing through him. He wasn't sure what this was. He wasn't sure what game she was playing. But Ryan knew one thing for sure. He was already involved, whether he liked it or not. His next move could either expose the truth or drag him deeper into something far darker than he had ever imagined. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as he looked at her, still steady, still calm, like she had the whole world under her control. It made him question everything he thought he knew. Who was Maya Carter, really? Was she a victim, a criminal, or was she something more dangerous? And the worst part was, he wasn't sure which one of those answers he was more afraid of. The door to the police station slammed open with such force that it caused several officers nearby to jump, their eyes wide in shock. The sounds of laughter and casual chatter, which had been filling the air just moments before, suddenly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The atmosphere in the station shifted instantly, the warm, familiar hum of routine grinding to a halt. A group of men dressed in dark suits and radiating an aura of authority walked in with purpose. Their steps were deliberate, their eyes cold and calculating, scanning every corner of the room. None of them were in police uniforms, but that didn't matter. The gleaming FBI badges on their wrists told all that needed to be known. The man at the head of the group was Nicholas Cole, a senior agent from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He strode forward with absolute confidence, his movements sharp, his presence commanding. Without pausing for a moment, he walked directly to the front desk. He didn't speak a word until he had reached the officer sitting behind the desk, at which point he held up his badge with a practiced motion. "We have a warrant for the arrest of officers Jonathan Reeves and Eric Dalton on charges of abuse of power, falsifying evidence, and framing innocent individuals," he said in a voice that was deep, steady, and unwavering. There was no room for negotiation, no room for doubt. The words hung in the air like a bombshell, shattering the calm. The officers in the room, who had been chatting and laughing just moments before, stood frozen in shock. It was as if the entire station held its breath in unison. The chatter ceased, the printers stopped, and the mundane bustle of the shift came to a screeching halt. No one dared to speak. The air in the room thickened, and the tension became almost suffocating. At the far end of the room, Reeves and Dalton, who had been joking with each other, froze mid-laugh. Their eyes snapped to Cole, and the laughter died in their throats. Dalton turned sharply, his face drained of all color, while Reeves, the ever-confident officer, gripped his soda can so tightly that it buckled under his fingers, crumpling with an audible pop. The arrogant swagger that had always defined him seemed to evaporate in an instant. Ryan Mitchell, standing off to the side, watched in silence. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the last, as he observed the panic that flickered across the faces of his colleagues. He realized something deep in his gut. They never thought this would happen. They had spent years manipulating situations, bending the rules to suit their needs, always managing to walk away unscathed. But this time, the game had changed. This time, they had made a fatal mistake. And what terrified Ryan the most was that they didn't even know where they had gone wrong. A full minute passed in a heavy, almost suffocating silence. The air seemed to grow thicker with each passing second, the weight of what was happening settling on everyone in the room. Then, Reeves stood up. The movement was stiff, almost as if he were trying to regain some of the confidence he had just lost. He straightened his posture and tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His usual cocky demeanor had faltered, replaced by something more vulnerable, something Ryan had never seen before. "What is this, some kind of joke?" he sneered, but his voice was thin, shaky. The bravado was gone, and in its place was uncertainty. Dalton, standing next to him, looked around, his eyes scanning the room for any kind of ally. He waited for someone, anyone, to speak up on their behalf, to tell the agents that this wasn't right, that they hadn't done anything wrong. But no one moved. No one said a word. The officers in the room merely exchanged uncertain glances, too intimidated by the presence of the FBI to intervene. It was over. Cole, unfazed, didn't need to say another word. Two FBI agents stepped forward, moving swiftly. They grabbed Reeves and Dalton by the arms, pulling them backward. And as the cold, metallic sound of handcuffs clicking around their wrists echoed through the room, it was as if time had stopped. There was no struggle, no resistance. No one dared to interfere. The officers in the room simply stood frozen, their eyes glued to the scene unfolding in front of them. Ryan Mitchell stood frozen for a moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly as his breath came in sharp gasps. His hand trembled ever so slightly as he placed the stack of files on the desk in front of Agent Nicholas Cole. These were the documents that held the weight of years of corruption. Reeves and Dalton's previous arrests, conflicting testimonies, falsified evidence, all neatly hidden in the police department system for far too long. No one had dared to dig through them. No one had questioned the integrity of these so-called officers until now. But today, everything had changed. Cole flipped through the files quickly, his eyes scanning each page with precision. His expression remained stoic as he absorbed the information, each document adding another piece to the puzzle they had been waiting to solve. "Good," he said simply, nodding slightly. He exchanged a quick look with an agent standing next to him, and the silent communication passed between them like a signal. Now they couldn't deny it. On the other side of the room, Reeves was still fighting. The handcuffs were too tight, but that didn't stop him from thrashing against the two FBI agents trying to drag him away from his desk. His fists clenched around the edge of the desk, as if he could somehow force the situation to go back to what it had been moments before. "You don't have evidence," he yelled, his voice breaking with desperation. "This is a joke. This is a setup. I'll sue you all." His words rang out in the quiet room, bouncing off the walls, but there was no response. No one came to his defense. A few officers in the room shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze, too afraid to be associated with him in this moment. It was as though they knew that even proximity to his failure would bring them into the crossfire. Dalton, on the other hand, stood completely still, his face pale as a ghost. He was completely frozen. Sweat glistened on his forehead as his eyes locked on the stack of files that Ryan had placed on the desk. He could feel his heart racing, the familiar weight of fear settling into his chest. He knew that it was over. There was no escaping it now. The truth had come to light, and there was nothing left to hide behind. The door to the holding cell creaked open, and Maya Carter stepped into the room. She walked out slowly, her back straight, her head held high, giving no indication that she had been locked in a small, sterile cell for hours. The calmness with which she carried herself only heightened the tension in the room. It was as though nothing could touch her, nothing could break her, and that implacable demeanor only made the room feel more suffocating, as if her very presence was pushing the air out of the space. As Maya passed by Reeves, she came to an abrupt stop. Her steps were deliberate, slow but steady, and her eyes never left him. The agent holding Reeves in place tried to maintain control, but Reeves was desperate now. He leaned forward, his face twisted in rage, his eyes blazing with fury. But Maya remained unmoved. There was no sign of fear, no sign of hesitation in her. She was calm, calmer than anyone in the room, especially her captors. She tilted her head ever so slightly, her gaze still locked on him. Then, with a deliberate step forward, she moved closer, close enough that her voice was the only thing he could hear. She spoke softly, but her words were piercing, each one cutting through the air with an intensity that sent a chill down Ryan's spine. "You think arresting me was my mistake?" For a moment, Reeves stopped breathing. The words hit him like a slap to the face, and in that single second, he realized that everything was about to change. His chest tightened, his pulse quickened. He tried to push past the shock, but the words, her tone, the certainty in her eyes, it was all too much. His anger flared again, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't the triumphant rage of a man who thought he was in control. It was the panic of a man who had just realized that he had lost everything. No, Maya continued, her voice gentle but sharper than any weapon. You were the one who lost from the very beginning. Reeves's face darkened. The full weight of her words sank in. He finally understood. This wasn't just another arrest. This wasn't just a simple case of catching a criminal. He had been played. All the arrogance, all the confidence, it had all been shattered in an instant. This was not a lucky catch, not a win. This was a carefully orchestrated trap. And Maya wasn't the prey. She had set the trap. She had planned every move. This entire situation had unfolded exactly as she wanted it to. He had been manipulated, and now he was the one being caught. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Reeves felt the familiar and terrifying sting of fear. Maya took a small, almost imperceptible step back, her gaze still unwavering. But there was no more need for words. Her smile was not kind, it was knowing. She knew exactly what was happening, and Reeves suddenly, and for the first time, knew that he was the one who had been played. The agents continued to move in, leading him away, but the look in his eyes, the way they darted from one agent to the other, trying to find any means of escape, any hope of a way out, was unmistakable. He had just realized that he was not in control anymore. As Maya stood there, watching him being led away, the room seemed to hold its breath. This was just the beginning for Reeves, Dalton, and the entire corrupt system they had built. Everything was about to come crashing down, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The images of Jonathan Reeves and Eric Dalton being led into the courtroom dominated the media, capturing the nation's attention. No longer in their familiar, proud police uniforms, the two men now wore the stark orange jumpsuits of prisoners, their wrists bound tightly in handcuffs. The flash of cameras from all sides intensified, snapping photos of every step they took as they entered the court. Reeves's face was shadowed with anger, his jaw clenched in defiance, while Dalton appeared utterly defeated, his eyes hollow, shoulders sagging under the weight of what had just come crashing down around him. They no longer held the position of power they once had, men who controlled the fates of so many. Today, the world saw them for what they truly were, criminals about to face the consequences of their own actions. The media erupted the moment the FBI made the announcement public. Headlines splashed across major news outlets. Corrupt police officers exposed. FBI investigation unveils shocking truth. 2 officers charged with evidence tampering and abuse of power. The collapse of the justice system. These bold titles were plastered on front pages, the story discussed and dissected on every major news channel. The list of previous arrests made by Reeves and Dalton was brought to light once again. Long-forgotten cases were re-examined, reopening the wounds of dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals. Some were freed immediately, their names cleared, while others, those who had lost years of their lives, sought to reclaim what had been stolen from them, taking legal action to demand the justice they had been denied. In the courtroom, the mountain of evidence against Reeves and Dalton seemed insurmountable. Audio recordings were played for the court, revealing their chilling voices as they discussed framing innocent people, setting up their victims with fabricated evidence. Their words, casual and matter-of-fact as they orchestrated the ruin of another's life, echoed throughout the solemn courtroom, amplifying the magnitude of their crimes. Ryan Mitchell, who had once been a colleague of theirs, was called to testify. Standing in the witness box, there was no hesitation in his voice, no lingering doubts in his mind. He had made his choice long ago. He would stand for justice, no matter the cost. Today, he spoke the truth without hesitation, his words steady and unyielding as he recounted the years of manipulation, corruption, and betrayal that had plagued the police force. Maya Carter was present in the courtroom as well, but she did not sit with the other victims. She didn't need to. She wasn't a victim. Maya didn't seek recognition or sympathy. She didn't need anyone's pity or admiration. What mattered to her, what had always mattered, was that the truth had come to light. As the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Maya remained calm, her expression unreadable. When the courtroom erupted in applause, when the cheers and claps of those who had suffered under Reeves and Dalton's hands rang out, Maya quietly stood. There was no emotion on her face, no visible relief or joy. She simply turned and walked out, her back straight, her steps measured. Justice wasn't about a fleeting moment of victory for her. It was the culmination of years of fighting, years of standing firm against a broken system. And she knew better than anyone that this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of something much larger. Reeves collapsed into his seat, his body sagging as though the weight of the conviction had broken him. His eyes were vacant, his thoughts far away, as the judge read aloud the sentence. 20 years in prison for falsifying evidence and abuse of power, along with multiple other charges. His fate was sealed, and there was nothing he could do to escape it now. Dalton, on the other hand, received a lighter sentence, but it was still a prison sentence, and the reality of his punishment hit him like a freight train. Both men were going to lose everything. No more badges, no more power, no more control. They would spend their lives behind bars, stripped of everything they had once used to manipulate others. This trial was more than just the fall of two corrupt officers. It was a reckoning for the entire system. The truth had finally surfaced, exposing the rot at the heart of law enforcement, the corruption that had been allowed to fester for so long. And Maya knew that this wasn't the end. The system was broken, and this case was only the first step in a much larger battle. The fight for justice wasn't over with a conviction. It was a continuous struggle. This trial had exposed the corruption, but it wouldn't stop there. Maya was prepared for what came next because she knew better than anyone. Justice wasn't handed down in a courtroom. It was fought for, every day, in the trenches. As Reeves and Dalton were led away, the weight of the moment settled over the courtroom like a heavy cloud. For them, it was the end of their reign of terror, but for those who had suffered at their hands, it was only the beginning of healing. And for Maya Carter, it was another chapter in a story she had written for herself long ago, one where justice would always prevail, no matter how long it took. Ryan Mitchell stood in front of the police station, his gaze silently fixed on the overcast sky. The air outside was fresher, cleaner, but the weight in his chest remained. Today, for the first time in his career, he felt like he had done the right thing. But at the same time, he couldn't shake off a bitter truth that settled deep within him. The system he had believed in for so long was far from perfect. Reeves and Dalton had been taken to court, and the police station felt emptier than ever, almost unsettlingly so. The officers who had once laughed and idolized Reeves as a hero now avoided eye contact as they passed by Ryan. No one spoke, but Ryan could feel the distance in their gaze, the caution, even the reluctance to acknowledge his presence. He was no longer a part of them. As he stood there, watching the world around him continue on, his thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Maya Carter walking out of the police station. Her shoes clicked against the wet pavement, each step purposeful and steady, as though she had never been imprisoned there. There were no signs of someone who had nearly been wrongfully convicted, no anger or resentment in her eyes, only the calm of someone who had grown accustomed to battles like this. Ryan quickened his pace, stepping into her path before she could leave. "Who are you, really?" His voice, once filled with doubt, now held only curiosity and perhaps a newfound respect. Maya stopped, her eyes meeting his, as if weighing whether or not to respond. A faint smile tugged at her lips, a smile that was soft but layered with so much that Ryan couldn't begin to understand. A person seeking justice. No further explanation, no clear identity, just that simple sentence. Yet it resonated deeply within Ryan, a quiet truth that seemed to ripple through him. Justice wasn't something that simply existed. It wasn't handed down on a silver platter. It required people willing to stand up, to ask the hard questions, to push for change. And today, for the first time, Ryan had become one of those people. Maya turned away, blending into the crowd on the street, vanishing as quickly as she appeared in his life. But Ryan knew one thing. He would never forget her. And more importantly, he knew that he would never go back to being the indifferent police officer he once was. The path forward was clear. Today had marked a change, not just in his career, but in who he was becoming. A man who would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Maya Carter sat silently by the window on the flight out of Arlington, her eyes following the fading city lights below. The night sky was pitch black, stretching endlessly in all directions, much like the secrets she had once uncovered, the dark corners she had stepped into. Did justice truly exist? The question lingered in her mind, despite having witnessed it being served countless times. The FBI had done their job. Reeves and Dalton had been convicted. The victims who had once been framed by them now had a chance at exoneration. The Arlington police station would have to change, whether by public pressure or by the very people within the system who still hoped to salvage what little reputation they had left. But Maya knew this was only a small part of a much bigger fight. People like Reeves and Dalton didn't only exist in a small police station. They were everywhere, in different uniforms, with different badges, operating within a system that had never truly been fair. She tilted her head slightly, her hands folding in front of her. She had grown used to this feeling. The temporary satisfaction of a small victory followed by the awareness that there were countless more battles waiting ahead. Justice didn't come naturally. It wasn't an obvious truth, but something that had to be earned, fought for, and sometimes sacrificed to preserve. A flight attendant walked by, offering her a drink. Maya simply shook her head. She didn't need anything at that moment, except for one thing: a new mission, another opportunity to continue the fight. The journey wasn't over. It had barely even begun. The soft chime of the phone broke the silence. Maya Carter glanced at the screen, already knowing who was calling without even checking. It wasn't an ordinary call. Calls like these were never accidental. She picked up the phone, raising it to her ear, ready for the next mission. The voice on the other end was steady, calm, without urgency. It was just one simple question, but it carried with it a world of implications. Maya didn't respond immediately. She lowered her gaze to the small handbag beside her. Her fingers lightly traced the smooth leather, then slowly pulled open the zipper. Inside, a thick stack of files lay waiting. A new name, a new face, another cop, another town, another broken system. What happened in Arlington was just the tip of the iceberg. She pursed her lips, then smiled. A brief, fleeting smile, but one that spoke of unwavering resolve. Always ready. On the other end of the line, a soft chuckle sounded. Good. I'll send the coordinates to you now. The call ended, and the phone screen returned to black. Maya leaned back in her seat, feeling the steady beat of her heart. Calm, steady, and full of energy. The game was beginning again. The fight for justice isn't confined to courtrooms or dangerous battlefields. It exists in everyday life, in the small decisions we make. Do we dare speak out when we witness injustice? Do we have the courage to defend what's right, even when it brings no personal gain? Not all of us are agents. Not all of us face criminal conspiracies, but we all have the opportunity to choose right from wrong. Justice doesn't just appear by chance. It's upheld by people who dare to stand up, who question the system, who speak the truth even when everyone around them chooses silence. If there's one lesson to take from this story, it's this: never underestimate the power of an individual who dares to act. The world doesn't change because people watch from the sidelines. It changes because there are those who dare to make a difference, no matter how small. Thank you for following this story until the end. This is not only a story about justice, but also a reminder that the truth always has a way to come out, as long as there are people brave enough to pursue it. If you find this story meaningful, if you believe that every small action can change a system, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following other emotional and meaningful stories. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. Have you ever witnessed an injustice? What would you do if faced with a situation like Ryan Mitchell's? Thank you for taking the time to accompany this emotional journey. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories, because somewhere out there, justice still needs people like you to speak up.